Howdy, everybody. So today we're here talking about micro indies, crafting epic games with tiny teams. And so we wanted to introduce ourselves with the panel here. Hi, I'm Zach. I'm the engineering director at Play Everywhere, which is a porting studio down in Georgetown. I'm currently the chair of the IGDA, as well as the engineering SIG, and help out lots of people all around with that. How about you, Renee?
Hi, my name is Renee Gittins. I am the studio head of Stumbling Cat. We just released Potions: A Curious Tale earlier this year. I guess I sit on the IGDA's advisory board as chair. No voting power in that, but I'm just there. So.
Hello, my name is Connor Fallon. I am the lead designer for Intelligible Games. I'm aware indie. I work on stuff. I work at AAA studios during the day, and then this is my side hustle. And Pro Philosopher 2 is coming out in October and is going to be my third game that I've released on the side.
Wishlist it.
Yeah, wishlist it.
Most excellent. My name, for those who met, is Nicole Lazaro. I run Zeo Design and Zeo Play, 30-year game industry veteran. I've got 3 games. The first one was the first iPhone game, like the very, very first one we did at iPhone Dev Camp. And I'm now working on Follow the White Rabbit here, soft launched on the Apple Vision Pro by day. I am a game design consultant, run a studio, and then, of course, by night, I'm playing with the White Rabbit.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jakub Kasztalski, and I'm originally from Poland, and now I live in Seattle. I'm the founder and creative director of Unbound Creations. We have a few games out of different size and quality, but we're probably most known for Headliner Novi News and Rain on Your Parade. And we're here with our brand new title that just released 2 weeks ago called Just Crow Things. Just a game of... It's a game about being a little crow, flying around, pooping on people, and stealing all their shiny trinkets.
And it's in PAX Rising if you want to check it out before the show ends.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I figured as a good baseline to kind of start us off here, I would absolutely love to ask the panel, like, what's your own journey, your own introduction into the world of micro indies, and how does that work for you?
Well, I guess I can start. So the reason I got into the creation of indie games and small indie games is because no one would hire a biomechanical engineer to be a game developer. So I just decided to try to make some games for my portfolio, and it turned out that I really liked the game I was working on, named at the time Potions, and I just kept running with it. So I did that while also building up my more large game development career. So started just with a prototype project that was supposed to be only for a portfolio piece, and turned it into an actual studio and product that I shipped.
I guess the roots for me are way back in college. There was no official game design program, so I was actually part of a club called Game Creation Society, where we made games in our free time. And then we all graduated, and we didn't stop. So we got together and made a good group of my college friends got together and made a game called Elsinore, which was Groundhog Day plus Hamlet. That took like 7 years. And then Pro Philosopher and Pro Philosopher 2. Been on top of that. But it's always been a nice... For me, it's always been a nice way to scratch a very different itch than I do with my day job, which I assume we'll talk more about that later. But yeah.
So Nicole here. I think my journey, I jumped into games because I wanted to do interactive narrative, and did consulting because I wanted to learn on other people's nickels. I probably waited too long to spin off and start to do my own stuff, but. My first game, my own game, was at iPhone Dev Camp in 2007, which was essentially a game jam. Right after the iPhone came out, made a game called Tilt, and Joe Hewitt measured the width of the Safari browser, so you could do portrait or landscape. So I designed a game that you matched green one way and blue the other way. We had 1 million downloads, and I eventually shipped it as Tilt World. So I've done that. So how many people have done game jams? Yeah, okay. So that's kind of my path in. And once I did that, I was hooked. I did another one called Unscramble the Oracle at a different game jam for Bose AR. So I'm doing a lot of work in the XR space, spatial audio, phone in the pocket, 2 miles of content, choose your own adventure with David Fox from LucasArts, he did the narrative for it. And then now, of course, Follow the White Rabbit, another surprise, Game Jam. This was for the mobile VR Game Jam almost 9 years ago. So we'll talk a little bit about like why 9 years and we're still like only soft launch. So that's my path in.
So my path as under our studio name started about a decade ago. And even before that, I also did some like internships for like some other companies. But it was definitely a lot of like don't quit your day job starting out. I've done a lot of like freelancing on the side to kind of like pay the bills while working on my game stuff. I've also explored filmmaking in the beginning. So I was kind of doing a few things at once. And I remember way back when Steam had a green light process where you couldn't just publish. You actually had to go through kind of like almost like a Kickstarter thing where people had to vote on your game, and only if it got enough votes, then they would be allowed to actually sell on the platform. So I remember, 11 years ago, my first game got through Steam Greenlight, and I was like, oh shit, I'm gonna sell this thing. Oh wait, I need a business license, I need a business account, I need all these things. So that's kind of like my origin story. And after that, there are some flops on the way, some successes on the way. And I think maybe in the last 4 or 5 years when I really started transitioning into I'm actually making sustainable income, I can actually do this kind of full time now. So that's kind of my long and convoluted story.
Excellent. Thank you all for the kind of baseline there. Kind of getting into making the things that you're working on, building your kind of initial ideas. How do you figure out what's a good idea? What questions do you ask? How do you answer them?
Oh man, I design all my games through frustration. It's terrible. Some game developers are like, yes, this beautiful design idea came to me as I woke up over my morning coffee. And I'm playing a game and I'm like, wow, I really hate that I have to murder bunnies all the time to level up to beat the next boss. I wish I could be a hero without having to literally slaughter all of the woodland creatures. And that's how I got my idea for potions, because it's resource-based. So if you just aggressively attack everything, you're wasting your resources. And I know that's not a super common way to go about it, but I feel like it proves that you don't have to feel like the most creative person coming up with ingenious ideas. You can take a game that you love and find something that you don't love about it, and then use that as a seed to figure out an idea to go from there. And once you start cultivating that and playtesting and iterating it, you come up with an idea that seems not at all like the original place you started.
Definitely when you're working on stuff on the side, there's just a little bit of what is something that we can actually accomplish working 1 day a week for 7 billion years? And for Elsinore, at least, it turned out that we bit off something very large where it turns out a narrative sim that is a time loop is quite complicated. And that's why I decided to go back to a visual novel for Pro Philosopher 2, because those are a little more contained, ideally. Not always.
But I think the nice thing about doing indie dev on the side is you can make big
Yes.
things. Not that I would recommend it, at least initially. Always start small.
There's definitely when you're doing things on the side, there's a really nice, you don't have to necessarily worry about as much of if it makes money. It's nice if it makes money, but you can really focus on this is the thing that I want to make. I want to put it out in the world for XYZ reason. And that's why my side projects, I think, have all trended towards some sort of remix of some humanities thing, because it was my background and it's fun to explore that and present it in a completely different way.
Awesome. I definitely would agree on focus on, with what Renee was saying, that what is it that you love? I loved working on Myst. I worked on 3 of the Myst games. I did not work on The Room, but I love mysteries and all that. So there's that seed of what you love. And given my, my history as a game developer and designer is that I'm usually on that cutting edge. I really like cutting edge technology because there's this big abyss. And I don't know why I enjoy throwing myself into the abyss again and again and again. But to prevent myself from certain doom, what I recommend is I always look for what is that one thing that, the platform does without crashing? And then B, can I design the core loop around that game? So if you remember Tilt, which became Tilt World, we could measure the width of the Safari browser so we could know the orientation of the game. I could have made a game where you just tapped on the screen, right? But you could play that on your computer, you could play that anywhere. But you couldn't rotate your laptop that way. So combining that unique value proposition, whatever unique thing of that platform, and then also making sure it was very robust. So with Bose AR, for example, you had a tap gesture that it would recognize. It's a pair of sunglasses with audio, no visuals. So you could tap, you could also nod your head, or you had a gesture recognizer. Both were kind of 50-50. They really didn't work that well, but we had really solid 3-DoF head pose. So you knew exactly like what that was, what sort of marble in the collar by mean 3 directions of freedom. So if I knew exactly like what that head was doing, I then created, we created a step counter in Unity, and then we there's a talk up on GDC about it, but I created some really interesting design language and tools for designing games that really utilize positional audio. So I invented this kind of term called OXL, which is an audio source with positional information, just like a voxel. And so you could walk around these, and if you walk around them, and then had the whole game mechanic, spawn out of that.
And with regards to like finding the one thing, like the core loop, the fun, there's actually a really great talk by Jonathan Blow on YouTube that you can find called Indie Prototyping. And it talks about identifying what is really fun and interesting about your idea and prototyping that to make sure that it actually holds up. It's not just fun on paper. And I would say that as an indie dev, as any game dev, like that's one of the best ways you can use your time is initially prototype like the core of what makes your game unique and fun, and prove to yourself that it's actually worth all the time investment for building out the rest of the code and ideas and art and everything.
Yeah, and you want to make sure, in my case, like when I'm using novelty, so it's new tech, it's something that you can't do elsewhere, so you have all those emotions, curiosity, wonder, and surprise, coming from that. And then, so in that core loop, you want to look at what emotions are coming out of those interactions. So I used the model, the 4 keys to fun, which is like these action emotion pairs. So what actions will create the kind of target emotions that I want? And then again, work that into the core loop. That's really, and then it's new, it's novel, it's different, and then that's novelty inherently is often fun, at least for the first 15 minutes.
Speaking of that, evoking emotions, kind of wanted to tackle this question 2 ways. So I think the initial question is like kind of where we get our inspirations from. So for me, from a lot of random things, honestly, like a lot of my game inspiration come from like doing non-game stuff. So one of our games is about being a leaf blower guy and annoying your neighbors. And that came from a real experience of anger. When 2 years ago I had COVID, I was isolating for 5 days, and I've noticed every single day at noon there was a leaf blower outside my window in March when there are no leaves, and every single day, and I'm like, what are you doing? What are you blowing, my guy? There's no leaves. Like, who's paying for this? Is this like a money laundering scheme? So then I was like, I can make a game out of this. And that kind of gave rise to the idea of like, what if you're a leaf blower and you earn points by annoying your neighbors? I think for me, I've definitely gone through that journey, and that's something maybe you can relate to, where some of my earlier games were a lot more like narrative-driven. They were kind of like visual novelty, political, social commentary. And as much as I love exploring those topics, they're also like extremely difficult to like showcase their market, because nobody wants to sit in loud PAX and read walls of text, which is kind of what I also evolved into more like accessible, approachable games after that. And I kind of look at nowadays I evaluate games through kind of like 3 lenses. Another great reference, aside from like Jonathan Blow, is like the Book of Lenses, the Art of Game Design. It kind of shifted my perspective to realize that like, I, as a designer, it doesn't matter what I want. The only thing that matters is what the player experiences. So it's all about delivering that experience and kind of finding that sweet spot between what I want to do, what I have resources and funding to do, and what is actually marketable and what players want to do. It's kind of like a puzzle of its own, like trying to like find the sweet spot between those 3 pillars. And that's kind of how I evaluate my ideas nowadays.
I think one of the other really interesting takeaways from that, again, that same talk that you brought up, is that a really salient observation was that he talks about how basically the best prototypes that he has made are the ones that were failures on paper, because they basically tell you what not to do. You're like, oh, I found out very quickly this is not going to be effective, so I just saved a bunch of time and money. So it's like figuring out what are those questions to ask and answer.
Fail fast, right? Like that's our goal as game developers is fail fast, find what doesn't work quickly, and either abandon that or adjust it to make it work.
And then prototype, you mentioned prototype, and just a shout out to paper prototyping, any paper prototypers, because literally I had like strips of paper. So you're rotating a device you'd never rotated before for iPhone, right? And so I've got these strips of paper with the falling blocks, and you're trying to figure it all out. It was super hard to imagine, but people were having fun, at the table, at my little table, and I was playtesting the paper version of it.
And that Lenses book is written by Jesse Schell. And over there, they've actually done what they call brown box prototyping, where they use cardboard to prototype VR games because it allows you to physically interact with things in a space as you would in VR once you build it out.
Shell Games was the first place I indied at. I was there when I was working on the original Pro Philosopher in Elsinore.
Oh, man.
So I definitely have distinct memories of Jesse playtesting early Elsinore.
That's really sick. When you're like continuing to develop your titles, like how do you bring people on? Do you start with people? Like what kind of like metrology do you use to inform that decision?
So when you're working nights and weekends, at least, there's a lot of everyone. My goal is to recruit people who are kind of on the same page, right? Like we're all working towards the goal, but we're not. A lot of them are in the same situation. No one's going to be financially dependent on like, hey, this game has to pay my salary, because we're all working at like ArenaNet or Riot or whatever other studios we're at. And a big part of that is, I think, in order to keep a project going when it's running on the side, is I think the secret sauce has always been to have like, I think there's a temptation when you're doing a side project for people to be like, oh yeah, here's our do it. We'll talk for a little bit, and then over the week you'll work on the thing and we'll check back in. But no, having actual like concrete work sessions where it's like, hey, we're sitting down for like 4 hours, even just for like any short amount of time, and we're working together online or in a room. That's the way you keep the side project momentum going, because a lot of people, life happens, and if you're not setting aside a specific time to do the work, no one's going to do the work.
I will have to admit, through like the 9.5 years I worked on my game, I never had a work session with anyone that I worked with.
Did that?
I mean, it worked fine. Yeah, so one of the reasons that it worked fine is that because I was doing pretty much all the code and most of the design, none of my work was ever roadblocked by somebody else's, really. So I just could work on a different part of the game. And when I am looking to bring people onto a project, I want to make sure that I have something for them to do. Like I have a vision for how they are going to contribute, because it's actually really demoralizing to be brought onto a team and not be given something to chew on. Like people who make video games are passionate about video games. They want to feel valuable. They want to contribute. And if you're like, yeah, join our team. Oh, we don't know what you can do right now. Just wait. Like nobody likes that feeling. So I try to prototype as much as I can. I try to have like sort of goals and like projects in mind as much as possible before I bring somebody on to contribute to those. And then most of the people who ever worked on Potions did very much nights and weekends, or like one weekend a month maybe. And I made sure that they didn't feel super pressured by that either. It was always super low pressure on them. So,
yeah, that's kind of similar to now that I'm like sort of trying to do that full time. Is I kind of like look at my development timeline as like divided into like two chunks. One is kind of like the prototype phase, where I'll just like mess around with the idea. And I think before the leaf blower game, I think I had like a screenshot of just my like Unity hub of just like 10 different like Unity projects that I would just like abandon, because like I would kind of like make it work and then be like, it doesn't feel good. And then once I have something that like, okay, I think this has legs. I think this is like hits that sweet spot of like, it's fun. I think it's marketable. Like I want to go into like full production. That's when I kind of like scale up. I like bring on the team. I have like kind of like you're saying, I think it's important to like have enough of a baseline that you can show it to someone to be like, oh, this is what we're going for, but also have a clear defined like, oh, I'm terrible at art, so I need artists. Oh, I want to get this done in X amount of time, so I'm gonna bring an extra developer to like design levels for it. So that's kind of like the two phases I look at my own production, which The caveat is that, kind of when you finish that and you go back to the prototyping phase, now your people don't really have anything to do. So I'm kind of trying to get better about like, okay, how can I keep that momentum going without having to like go back to like, okay, we're done with the project. See you guys in a few months.
I think one of the keys to making sure you only recruit people when you actually need them is part of knowing for your particular game, and it'll be different based on the type of game that you're making, what can be terrible for the longest, right? Like, for example, for Pro Philosopher, it is a story game, right? So what I had to test out very quickly was what people engage in the script, right? But that meant that for art, I could have like literal cutouts of the Wikipedia pictures of different philosophers that just slid around the screen. And actually people found that kind of funny, which is good because it's also a comedy game, so, it hit the tone. But for a different type of game where your primary selling point is you're trying to create atmosphere, right? Like, you might want to be investing in art earlier to see like, hey, is this going to capture the tone? So yeah, it's very much based on what your game is.
Or sound in horror games.
Yeah.
Like,
I think for us, so I'm funding self-funding the game, and so I have to, I can play like most of the roles if I have to, and so that helps, because then I can be just sort of the thing. But you get tired of carrying everything, for a long time, and then I'm just chronically running out of money. So I will, I will like, get a consulting gig, and I will do it, full time or full and a half time or 3 time. I'm running 3 shifts on myself, and then I take that money and then not pay me, but have it, and then I will hire like teams to like these people to do some more engineering that's a little out of scope for me, or a little bit of art, and then I run out of money, and then I have to go back to consulting, and then I always have these consulting gigs that come up, and that's my revenue source. It's really interesting work, and then I have to put the game on the side, and that's that can be really gut wrenching after a while to always have to like I can't do the like 1 day a week thing. Because it takes me like, I don't know if anyone else in this, like, but it takes me like a day just to pick up where I left off.
yeah, it's really
Right.
disruptive for sure.
And 4 hours, I mean, it takes me 4 hours to just like, okay, get into that mindset. So, but basically I contract, all the artists, all the engineers I've pretty much ever worked with. I do have volunteers that are doing some testing and stuff over that. So I try and create these little teams, and I try and pay everyone, not great, but at least try and pay them, because, because that's my personality. But
Yeah, actually, this dovetails really nicely. Like on that same vein, like what are the kinds of considerations of funding for your projects, or compensation for team? And there's many varied arrangements there. So I'm kind of curious, like what goes into your thought processes?
Lack of responsibility towards large corporations. I would say that I often speak to indie developers who seem to think like the only possible way to get their games made is to get a publisher. And that is absolutely not the case. Like, there's so many other routes. You could do moonlighting, you can do co-development, you can do contracting plus development. Those are all really reasonable ways that allow you to maintain control of your timeline and your IP and ultimately your profits. Because you're taking a big risk. You should at least reap rewards from that if it ends up being successful. And in a lot of publishing deals, particularly if you don't have a ton of industry experience, can be not very beneficial. I know that it can be really compelling to do revenue split amongst friends. And that's also a good way, if you don't pre-plan for it, to lose friends. So that was always one that was worrisome for me. I self-funded until I did a Kickstarter, and I tried to pay I paid everybody up front because I wanted everyone to feel like they were being taken care of. But that's a unique and privileged financial position to be in, to be able to support those people.
My friends and I are apparently a bunch of weirdos because we just did revenue split.
You have good friends.
Yeah.
You have good friends with good temperaments.
And yes, and also, I mean, it helped. We were friends beforehand, right? So that helped. I mean, it sounds like that was also the case. I'm sorry. But the fact that in our situation, everyone was moonlighting, I think also reduced the pressure a lot, right? Because it's like, none of us are going to starve if we're not paid, if we're not currently making money on Elsinore or Pro Philosopher. And I think I think whenever you're recruiting someone, or working with someone and figuring out how to compensate them, you need to meet them where they're at, right? Like, there's other people on the project that like, hey, they're doing a specific role that I need for a certain period of time, and I make sure to pay them all up front, right? Like, if you're doing QA or doing something where you're coming on the project for a little bit, like, I want to make sure that, you're taken care of. But if you're in the same position as me and you're making your money, working at your day job, I feel more comfortable doing a pure revenue split, and then it tends to be less drama focused. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've certainly heard it work out for some people, but I've also heard things where like one of the co-founders, 3/4 of the way through the project, just stops, and then difficult.
And the other thing I would just add to what I said earlier is that there's a difference between revenue splits, so that means you're splitting the revenue that may come from the game. There is also like ownership of like the IP. And then where it can get squirrely, at least in one of our projects, we had, it was divided up into like equal fours or equal fifths. But then I had to put, after the game jam, I had to put in like 400 extra hours in order to get it, in order to do all the level design and all of that. But yet I still, you have to then renegotiate. So that's something you want to think of. It's like what's going in, and if there's extra money, if you got to put in money for marketing or other expenses, how does that reflect the ownership and royalties at the end, or if you want to do a sequel or something like that.
Yeah, something that I would say as a kind of a bit of a word of caution if you're doing something like a revenue share. I'm always a little bit jealous of people who you just meet great people, you instantly vibe, or maybe you went to school together and you just leave with basically a team and you're on the same page. That's fantastic. I haven't really had that, so I've always had find people, and I did on my first game do a lot of basically revenue share, because we were all just passionate about the idea. I didn't have any money back then. And the one issue with that, though, is that it basically, if you're not already really on the same page, it doesn't give you any kind of leverage as a boss, especially when it is kind of your idea, and you're also investing your money into the marketing, setting it up on the Steam pages, going to conferences, networking. And now if someone that isn't pulling their weight around, you don't have any leverage. You can't be too hard on them because you're not paying them. So it also, one of the reasons why I nowadays don't like doing rev share as much, because I do just more as a boss, and I'm also investing a lot more money, like I said, marketing, console ports, testing, all those other things. And also something what you said earlier about if someone's doing a job, they should be paid. I mentioned I've been a freelancer. I've been on the receiving end of not being paid for months, and I had some shitty clients before, and I try really hard not to be one of those. Exactly, yeah, you get it.
Oh, yeah.
And that's
unfortunately.
Yeah, it's gonna have to be burned a little bit to learn the lessons. But that's also why I kind of scale my projects, or spend half my production prototyping myself, because I'm if I can't pay people, then I'll just either do it myself or I won't do it, because I don't want make people do unpaid labor.
Yeah, there's an interesting differentiation here I just realized in that I guess this isn't surprising for the people who are making a game about political philosophy, but there's our company structure is everyone owns the game, right? Everyone is who's a major contributor to the game is a stakeholder in the company. And yes, that would be a terrible idea if with the wrong people involved, but it's worked out. So
You just have
I guess the moral of this is, if you do anything that I'm doing, take it with a serious grain of caution and make sure you know the people that you're working with.
And know them beyond just friends.
Yes.
It's very different being close friends with somebody and working with someone.
Yes.
I want to add too that if you have, this is more of a leadership question as well, and I, at the early part of my career, I said everything dealing with management, you don't need any of this, right? I have the arrows in my back, whatever, to retract that statement. But yeah, so alignment. So are you trying to build the same game? Are you trying to go after the same kind of emotions? And some people say that you should be able to make any kind of game, even though it's not your favorite game. I really work much better if everybody is okay, we love Myst, we love The Room, we love Sherlock Holmes, we love Little Rabbits, whatever it is, or we love VR. I actually have an artist that that can't actually use VR because they get sick. So that, putting them on this project, is a very limited scope. We can't continue. So alignment's good.
On tagging onto that, like I've mentored some teams before, and it's also good to question if you're on the same page, because you might assume you are, you think you are, and then all of a sudden it comes out with like some, after much pain and consternation, you're not at all.
Yeah, the musician says, "Oh yeah, but I made this piece of music. It's amazing. It's 20 minutes, and no, you can't. The player can't skip it."
And
And if you pull it, and if you don't, then I'm going to pull all my IP out of the project. That kind of thing. I mean, just hypothetically, that never happened actually to me.
Yeah, and on that note, I would also say that even if you're like great friends, even if you're on the same page, make sure you get everything in writing. Have a proper agreement, ideally run by like an attorney or some kind of a legal entity. And definitely doesn't hurt to be more verbose. Make sure you consider all the edge case scenarios as much as you can, because it protects everybody. I'm always very transparent with my team. Everything is outlined in the contract. Even what they can do. Can you use it for your own portfolio, stuff like that, which I'm always super okay with, because why wouldn't I? That's just extra marketing for the game for us. But yeah, make sure you get everything in writing, because again, it helps avoid those kind of difficult, who owns what part, what if you have a disagreement, and if you're all in this together, it's for everyone's benefit to do that. It doesn't mean you don't trust each other. It means you're proactively putting the necessary care and avoiding problems before they arise.
Clarity.
Yeah, and then also, one of the team members goes to India and never comes back because they have a change of life, and then,
This is actually, I do want to heavily +1 to get everything in writing, because one of the things that you want to get in writing is, hey, especially if you're being more loosey-goosey, like apparently I do, what are the conditions on which this arrangement would need to change, right? And if that's part of the contract and everyone's on the same page of hey, yes, I'm a owner of the company now, but if I stop working on it, other people can buy me out, right? Or do something like that. That's really essential. The way I use this phrase a lot, not just for games, but and I think I applied it a lot to my indie development, is you kind of work, you can trust, but also you need to have a plan for the worst at the same time. And by having both of those things in parallel, you'll likely have a positive working dynamic, but then also be prepared if something does go off the rails.
And that's what the paper's for. The paper's for the, here are the failure cases, here are the worst scenarios. I mean, maybe don't alarm people about them, but, just that. And then one of my lawyers said that, it's, the paper's there in case the faces change, So, and we just, enough if you're forced to put it in writing, then you've got clarity. And people often oh, I don't want to describe this project. I can't even possibly imagine how many animations we're going to need or whatever. But at least if you, get all those ducks lined up, then you're in agreement on something at least.
Yeah, and I think some people might have, I don't want to have so much conflict when we're just starting on a project, but it's better to get that conflict out of the way before you sink 10 months into a project. By the way, I had the same scenario too on our first game too. We had one of our lead artists just said oh, I'm taking a mental break and I'm gonna be gone, bye. And he just disappeared forever at 10 months into the project. So we were okay.
And they were the only ones with the password for the, for the archive for the art, right?
Indie dev is fun, and not all horror stories about working with your peers.
I didn't get into video games to have fun.
Yeah. This is just a potential high-risk area, and so that's why we care passionately about it. We also care about fun in games, I promise.
But yeah, specifically on that, okay, you get things squared away, you're working, you're making the dream, making stuff happen. What are some development tips? What are the unique challenges you have for small teams? How do you deliver, build that stuff? What are your check marks?
One of the things that was the best piece of advice that was given to me is to lead with why. I am not a very good artist. If I want a piece of art from an artist, I should not tell them specifically every quality I want in that art piece. I should tell them why I'm asking them to make the art piece. Maybe what emotions I'm trying to evoke, what the character's like, what the situation's like, and then trust them as the expert I have hired to do the thing, or friend that I have agreed to work with to do the thing, that they will do that with their expertise and knowledge and experience. Because if you try to micromanage an indie team or any team, you don't get effective work, and you get tons of overhead, and you end up upsetting people and just not getting good quality stuff.
I would plus one that, and I would say that I look at it as, creating, again, with that written statement of work at the beginning, it's like, what are the boxes? What are the, like, kind of, put some parameters on the creative output that we're putting in, and then being sure everybody has a sandbox of their own, depending on the personality, of course. Some people but then we've got, it's just clear, like, where they have freedom, and of course you're hiring them for their expertise. The other thing is I do a lot of alignment at the beginning where we're brainstorming together and we're looking, we're bouncing ideas off each other. So a lot of that design thinking, kind of philosophy is very helpful, and creating that culture of trust, I think, is very, very important for dev teams. So that's what I'd say.
For me, I'm actually kind of curious, like, raise of hands, how many people in the audience are here because they're interested in making video games? Okay, a good amount. When I was starting out, and I think that's something I see a lot of independent creators relate to, is that I was always the guy who was making a game, but I was never the guy who was finishing a game. And I, at one point, realized that I just have to get something done. And something that I believe in is just set a date, and no matter what, just stick to it. If you have to cut stuff down, if you have to tone things down, you have to go through that process, from starting to finishing to all the oh crap, we forgot to add the credit screen or the main menu, to publishing it on Steam. And I realized also after my first release that half the lesson I only learned after the game was released, after seeing what the wider audience reacted to it, after seeing how streamers played it. And think of it as I'm assuming if you want to make a game, you probably want to make more than one game. You probably want to make, over the course of your life, 10 games. So don't think of it as like your one only chance. Think of it as just the beginning. It's one of your 10 games. Just get it out there and just keep releasing. And that's something that I've been strict with myself, and that's why some of my games maybe are of variable quality, but I keep getting them out. I keep releasing them. I keep having new things. And each time you do that, it's like, there's so many factors. It's always a little bit like pulling a slot machine. So you just have to keep pulling that arm more and more. And yeah, just keep releasing stuff, and don't beat yourself over if it's not perfect. You'll have another chance, and take those lessons onward.
And we're kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum, because it took me 3 years to start because I had to raise money. This one's taking me 9 years. But the other thing about team alignment and stuff, we didn't talk about player testing yet as much, but one of the really important things is like having the whole team present, either over video feed or whatever, so that we look at what players, what's happening with players, and is this the experience we want, right? And then have those discussions, very helpful for alignment.
One of the challenges, especially when working on a side project, as I mentioned earlier, things go slow. The world will be different by the time your game comes out than when you started it. Just something to keep in mind, especially if you're, when you ask about what is your goal in making your game, if your goal is to make, to chase a trend, that trend might just be gone by the time you finish your game. So it's really good that's why I personally have gravitated towards projects that are more along the lines of this is just something weird that's targeting a niche, right? And that niche is generally going to still exist, but it's not the current hotness.
Well, just to add on that, with Follow the White Rabbit, I started in a Gear VR jam, which was before the Rift, on Oculus Rift. And then I soft launched it, 9 years later on the Apple Vision Pro. The graphics are 1K. The resolution on these screens are 4K per eye. So I'm the resolution's so high on the Vision Pro is that I've got these artifacts and I'm trying to do the art. And I'm zooming in on my laptop, and I zoom in, I see it in headset, zoom in, see it in headset, don't see it on the thing, in Photoshop. And my laptop, which is a nice laptop, the resolution of the screen is too low for the screen over here. So technology also evolves in terms of market trends, but they also evolve. So I have to buy a big 4K monitor now in order to edit for the resolution of this new hardware. It's just insane.
one of the most pithy phrases that I really enjoy about video game development that can also be a little scary is the first 90% of your game takes 90% of the time, and the last 10% of your game takes the other 90% of the time. And that ends up being so true because of many reasons. Like, first of all, yeah, final polish is super important. But going back to a previous note, playtesting. Like, you can play test your own game so much that you lose your ability to assess what is good and fun. You are way too close to it. And so a lot of your game development should be getting other people to play the game, seeing how they react, not just them filling out forms. Like, ideally, here in Seattle, we have Seattle Indies. You can bring a laptop with your video game and just like put it in front of other people. It's an amazing opportunity. Or your friends or family or anyone you can get to play your game. Because the more you have people interact with your game, the earlier, the less bad routes you're going to go down, the faster you can clean things up, the more fun you can make it. And especially when you get to the end of that project, when you're doing your FTUI, first time user experience, that's a game development term. You want that to be so polished, and you're going to need dozens and dozens of play tests to make sure that it's fun.
I will also say, as someone who's gravitated toward narrative games, you need those other people to be like, oh yeah, no, this hits. This still works for people, because after you've played through your own game 7 times, you're not gonna cry at the big sad cutscene or laugh at your stupid joke.
I laugh at my stupid jokes.
Oh yeah, you guys.
It's terrible.
Occasionally I'll run across one that I haven't seen in a while. I'm like, I still got it. But most of the time, I'm like, oh yes, okay, they're making a joke about Confucius being a wizard again. Okay, moving on, all right. And then I watch someone else play it, and they're like, ha, 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 and I'm like, all right, we're good, game's good.
Along with those kinds of development processes, though, are there any kind of any mechanical tips, like what goes into a good play test, or how do you do build reviews, and what do you do? What kinds of questions are you looking for in those?
This is totally not the technical tip that you're looking for. Please use source control. Please use source control. You do not want to be one of those threads on r/game dev. It's like, my 2-year project got deleted from my computer, and I never made a copy of it.
I'm not going to name. It's not my studio. I know of at least one big studio that has a big project that isn't using source control, and it horrifies me.
I mean,
Git is free.
Not at my studio.
Git is me. I do not recommend just uploading copies of your entire project to Google Drive. But if you're so terrified of source control, that's the only thing you'll do. It's something at least. But yeah, Git, Perforce, whatever. Please back up your game.
It's also really useful for later on when you want to do dev blogs and stuff like that, and give the history of the game, because you can always go back to the early version that had your goofy temp art, and then you can be like, here's what it used to look like. Here's what it looked like now, and it's just it keeps that archive for you, which is just very valuable because people want to hear those stories.
And after release, it's auto-gen patch notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's a really great talk, GDC talk. If you go to GDC YouTube channel and look for Crashlands, there's a great talk about how basically they automated the crap out of their entire pipeline, including using source control for both auto-generating test case scenarios for the testers, as well as patch notes for Steam, and they converted them to checkboxes, so they could the testers could check off which of those changes was verified that it works. It's amazing how they streamlined the whole process and just leveraging all those tools.
Wow, that's good. I've got a low-tech one, so 2 questions. One is, how likely are you to recommend this game to a friend, anonymous survey on a scale of 1 to 10? White Rabbit started with a -5 net promoter score. Thank you very much. And then, but of course, now we're at 69, or if we hit our audience, it's 95, 99. It's up there. But we only got there because we iterated every time we, did a Comic-Con or a hallway demo or whatever. I would, have it on my phone, or I didn't show the back of my QR codes, but I've got QR codes on the phone, so I can say look, just fill out the survey, sign up for email. And then the second question is, how much would you miss this if you didn't have it, if you no longer had it? That's a more hardcore question. I haven't really used it for us, but those two things are kind of important way of getting an audience read I have more questions about that. But then, given that it is VR and it's really hard to get people to agree, so I'm a Unity dev, so I ported it to my phone, and so I have a mobile version of the build that's in here, and I can just whip that out in line and say, oh look here, and the controls all work. I've got and then they can actually play it, on the phone. So being able to have very low friction on how you get into your game, that means you can I've tested probably 5,000-6,000 players, over the course of 9 years. But it helps because then that feedback is super, super valuable.
I really like designing for emotion. That's how I sort of view design for games. I of course, try to get a core loop or moment to moment, minute to minute, and session to session loops. That's how I just think of game design. But what I'm really looking for and what I really try to polish is when a player feels satisfied or accomplished or surprised or scared or feels intention. And when you're watching a playtester, either over camera or you're there with them in person, you can look at their micro expressions when they startle or giggle. And I make note of when that happens or when they're confused. And then I go back later and look at all of those instances and see, is there a way I can amp this up? Is there a way I can make this more surprising with sound effects or visuals? Is there a way I can make this more satisfying with VFX celebrations? And I think that's where you get the extra juice and polish and satisfaction, as well as avoid the frustrations that can be in those moments that are less polished.
Since you brought up micro expressions, if you look up the 4 keys to fun, the 4 keys to fun, that's a research I did 20 years ago. There's a GDC talk on it, and it's used by, it's in several of the books, Koster, Shell, and that sort of thing, but it's all about, designing these action-emotion pairs. And so to Renee's point is that you can, through the mechanics of the game, you can create emotions. And so when you have a narrative that you want people to go on this emotional journey, you can have mechanics that are amplifying that, or maybe you're doing a cross thing, but there's intention there. And there's no substitute for bright, shiny, flashy things. 2 things in White Rabbit. One, when we added the little rabbit prints on the floor, that really went up, appeal went way up. And then the other thing is just the glows and the magic and all these particle effects, which is just low lift and what? But everyone was like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. It's okay. Anyway, that's a secret, probably not a secret design tip.
Riffing off of what Olivia just said about kind of balancing once you get that that feedback, I do the same thing about just watching their faces basically. But when it comes to balancing, I forget where I heard that. I think it was maybe a GDC talk about juice in games or something. But when you're, or maybe it was a tweet, but when you're balancing something oh, this should be maybe the effect should be bigger. Don't make it 10% bigger. Make it twice as bigger, 5 times bigger, just because it's hard to balance something on such a little micro scale. You don't want to keep increasing it 10% and testing. Just make it much higher and then see how much better it feels, and then you can scale it back because you have a bigger range. If you make it 5 times bigger, then oh, maybe it should be halfway there. And to give concrete examples, so I mentioned we're working in a game where you play as a little crow, you fly around, you poop on people. So one of the tasks is you want to poop on cars, and some of the testers says oh, it doesn't really feel fulfilling, because you just poop on them and nothing happens. So instead of just making some kind of a visual, we just what if we just make the cars explode and get set on fire? Just go extreme, and people just love that because what is going on? And just exactly what you said, make it a little bit more flashy.
And for visual effects, how many people have played Peggle? So Peggle is exhibit 1 in my book anyway of going over the top on special effects to create, just that. It's just the feeling of winning, just that extra amplifying stuff. But yeah, definitely having things go over the top, and then you can always dial it back.
One of the most important parts of playtesting, at least for the style of game that I've been working on, is seeing how different people's brains work when they're tackling similar content. Especially with a game, so I actually don't believe I defined Pro Philosopher. It's essentially a game where you're looking for logical contradictions and you're trying to throw things that the person previously said at their other statements in order to find hey, these 2 things are in conflict, and then they scream and run around. Very like Ace Attorney, if anyone's ever played that. But the nature of that is that someone might someone might look at two statements and be like, these clearly clash, and I would never have thought that those two statements were designed to clash.
Yeah, I
But-
play tested Pro Philosopher 2, and then I try to make a
Yeah,
stick
and-
with that. You're like, oh, that should work. And
Yes,
it will.
and I
think
added
that-
yes, and I added it and make it work. And so there's so many, and then it's also often inspires like different jokes because people like to be seen, especially in content like this, right? Where it's like they want to like, oh, the devs thought of the thing that I did. When really, I really only thought of it because I've play tested 100 people before you got here. But yes, clearly I foresaw this.
I think that brings the idea of like a target audience is that my kind of honest belief after watching a lot of games that like there's no like the question is like, is my game good or bad? The question is like, how big is your target audience and how easily you can reach them? And that's something you also have to consider. Like if you have a friend who only plays like online shooters and you show them your puzzle platformer, probably not the most useful feedback. I mean, there is still value because you can still gather a lot about like how to make the controls feel intuitive, how to make the game accessible, but be mindful of that. Who is your target player? And I think, again, something I've heard somewhere is that like it's the death of indie games is when you make a game that's like good but not great. And I think it's better to be polarizing. Like if people, it's better for people to either really, really love your game or really hate it than just everybody across the board be like, it's all right.
I just want a big plus one that one quickly because like I was just talking about making, especially making things on the side and not being able to trace like trends. The trends are the things that are huge wide appeal at this point, right? And it's just you pick your target audience, and if you can nail it, honestly, it is meant more to me if for the games that are like maybe a little less successful, when someone comes up to me and be like, this is my favorite game, because it just so specifically targeted them. And again, that's part of the benefit of working on the side, right? Like that metric can matter more. But yeah, I think knowing your target audience and nailing it is really important.
And getting for the target audience, what emotions are they going after? So I'm doing a mystery adventure about a magician whose magic one day suddenly works and the rabbit disappears. And in VR, I made it a magician because the quality of immersion, you go in, you go someplace. The emotions of magic are curiosity and wonder. That it's all pulling you in. So you want to know like what emotions are they really going after, that target audience, and then design the theme and the gameplay and everything to follow that lead.
Yeah, definitely. You also, something I want to note is like you are not your audience. On one hand, there's this dichotomy of healthy tension. You want to scratch your own itch because no one's going to pursue this thing as passionately as you will when you're digging into this, but also you're not the person who's going to be giving you a buck. So
Also, game developers aren't your audience. It's like, in very rare cases, that might actually be the case. I have a feeling that like a lot of times when indie devs do marketing, they market to other indies, and then the indies are like, yeah, it's great. It's wonderful to get support from any other indie developers. They can help you reach other indie fans. But if the only people who are giving you good feedback on your game are other game devs, that's a very, very narrow target audience.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true for, I think a lot of like Reddit gaming groups or even Twitter. Like I realized that I use Twitter a lot, but I don't use Twitter as a marketing platform. I use it as a networking platform. Twitter is basically the LinkedIn of indie games for me. But like all those likes don't mean anything. Like it's just other developers prepping each other. And it's great. It's great for morale, but exactly what you're saying. Like those are probably not your customers.
all right, I'm gonna jump in here and also say, like, what kind of advice or resources do you have for people trying to really start on this journey? Like, what specific things do you think would be really set someone up for success that you wish you had had when you had started?
I think the best resource for your success are other developers. So it sounds like all of you are either active in development or getting started there. Network with each other, network with us, go to local events, whether it's Seattle Indies, IGDA events, game development conferences and conventions, because you are going to run into lots of problems with unique answers, and it helps to have people who've been through the journey before, which is sort of like a resource of resources. But it's definitely helped me so much on my path. Like I've bugged everyone here about things in game development.
Get a version stood up early, get people running at it. I think it's just extremely valuable. The moment you can get it out of your head into any form.
Game jams.
Yeah, game jams. Game jams are also great. But I think my number one advice for everyone starting, especially if it's your first game, is whatever your dream game is, don't make that your first game. Start with something small. Like start with something really small that you will, as we talked about, you will finish. Because you'll learn from that, and then you'll be able to move on to the next thing. And yeah, I think smaller is almost always better because you can always add more, but it's harder to chop away, especially for your first time when you haven't figured out that skill.
Again, why game jams are great.
Yes.
Yeah, totally +1 to all of that. And then I would add YouTube videos. So I am, for better or worse, self-trained Unity developer, and I'm always there, Stack Overflow, et cetera, learning just, maybe this isn't a best practice, probably not, probably my architecture sucks, but just learning what I need to do. And then, I make that happen. I absolutely have people that I talk to and, that I've learned from. I watch a lot of GDC. I go to GDC, a lot of talks outside my discipline to do that. But, the just-in-time learning can happen. It's a real thing, and we've been able to, at least mosey along.
I like just-in-time learning. I've not heard that phrase before. That's perfect.
Well, we just keep hopping along, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like what makes a great developer is not someone who knows a lot, but someone who's quick to skim documentation and learn it on the go because technology advances so fast. But to answer the question, I wanted to give a few specific resources. I mentioned the serial like the Art of Game Design Book of Lenses by Jesse Schell. It's one of my favorite game design books. Also, the GDC YouTube channel, they have a lot of great videos there. You can, for so many categories, from marketing to design to art. Even though I've been in the industry for a while, I still keep constantly watching videos there because there's so much great information. And there's one specific talk that I forgot who did or where it was from, but if you just search on YouTube for everything I learned about game design, I learned from Disneyland. It's a fantastic talk that's also kind of reframed a lot of my approach. And also, I've been to Disneyland a few years ago, and I was like, wow, that's actually a brilliantly designed park. As a game designer, I was amazed. And just kind of closing it off, I also just wanted to say that, I think there's many paths to success. Games are a bigger, money-wise industry than music, than videos. And we're all very different stories. Some of us are just keep releasing games. Some of us spend 10 years on your dream game, and all of those can be valid. There's not a single one path to success. And I think it was Rami who said that by the time you hear any advice, it's already kind of outdated. So, we're just data points, and sorry for wasting your time. But, keep searching, keep watching YouTubes, keep talking to other developers.
Except for spreadsheets for designers, okay? Did I say spreadsheets? That's your best friend, and you may hate them, but yeah, spreadsheets.
Also, speaking of Rami Ismail, Leveling the Playing Field, it's his blog. It's a phenomenal trove of information to be able to find things.
And how to market a game. howtomarketagame.com, the Discord, the free How to Make a Steam page. So we've talked about a lot of things here, but I think that you need 3 things to make an indie game successful. It needs to be fun, it needs to be marketable, and you have to market it. Please market your games. No one will play a great game if they don't know about it. So do not leave marketing for your last 2 weeks.
Just because you build it, they won't come.
No, they won't come.
Also, yeah, the How to Market a Game by Chris Zakowski, that's a great resource. And another similar one is called Game Discovery Newsletter. And that's just a newsletter. I think they send it once every few days, and it just kind of similar, deep dive into why was this game successful. Great resource.
I feel a little bad about this, that I'm going to add to this as a bit of a downer, but be aware that more indie games are released every year than, especially on Steam right now, than there were I think in the last 10 years or something like that. So it's one of the things I think, especially when you're getting started, is honestly, you need to be okay with the fact that your first game probably will fail, right? It's just odds are it won't take off.
Well, why don't we just say, you have more than one measure of success you can succeed where maybe that other one doesn't.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what I was talking about, but yes. Yeah. I feel bad now. Wow. All right.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think the best way to combat that is to always try to be mining a skill to improve, something to set yourself apart. Because just because there is shovelware out there as well, that's kind of also skewing numbers. But I definitely, oh, go ahead.
Oh, as I say, and that's like one of the wonderful thing about being on these micro indie teams is you get to wear a lot of hats, which means you get to learn so much. And I find that to be sort of one of the funnest parts of indie development.
You get to do a lot of things you wouldn't get to do otherwise. And I think that's, as we saw, we talked about different metrics of success, right? Like, especially as someone who wear indies, right? Like, I can go back and be like, hey, I did this weird thing on my side project, and it applies to what I'm doing now. And I wouldn't have had that experience otherwise.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And we'll be out in the hall afterward. You can ask us questions and talk to us. Have a good rest of PAX.